You bet.
Good morning. The July 28th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to deal with COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Estimates continues to meet virtually. At this time, I would ask Comptroller Henry for any corrections, additions, and noted abstentions for today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no changes or corrections to today's agenda. A protest was received for page 67, Department of Human Resources 2022 Actives and Retiree Health Insurance Plans. This protest was received from AFSCME Local 44, Local 800, City Union of Baltimore, IAFF Local 964, Baltimore Fire Officers, IAFF Local 734, Baltimore Firefighters, Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 3, AFSCME Local 558, Community Health Workers and Nurse Practitioners, and AFSCME Local 2202, Human Service Workers. The following items are being deferred. On page 67, Department of Human Resources 2022 Actives and Retiree Health Insurance Plans. The following items are being moved to the non-routine agenda. Page 23, Department of Law, Settlement Agreement and Release. No items are being moved to the routine agenda. The following abstentions were received by the board. Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott on page 27, item number 1, Health Department, ratification to agreement with Johns Hopkins University. Honorable President Nick Mosby, pages 55 through 58, Personnel, Office of the State's Attorney, number 35 through number 42. No other abstentions were received, and no votes are listed, and no rejection of recommended awards.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I now would like to direct the board's attention to a memorandum from my office dated July 27, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items, together with any corrections and additions that have been noted by the Comptroller. At this point, I'll entertain a motion to approve all items contained in the routine agenda.
So moved. Muted.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor of approving the items on the routine agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda items have now been adopted. On to our first and only non-routine agenda item for today. It can be found on page 27, Department of Law Settlement Agreement and Release. The settlement is for the amount of $158,000. $158,298. The purpose of this settlement is to resolve a suit brought by a former DPW employee related to termination. At this time, I would like to recognize Mr. Gary Gilkey from the Law Department to speak on this item and give us any additional background. At this point, I yield the floor to you, Mr. Gilkey.
Good morning, Mr. President, Comptroller, and Mayor. Shall I just start with a background on the case?
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
Thank you. On behalf of DPW, I am requesting that the board approve a settlement of an employment matter involving a former employee. This employee was promoted by the former chief of staff for DPW back in April of 2019, was offered a salary. That salary well exceeded the 10% that is allowed by city policy. There was a long period of time where the parties were disputing what salary should be given, whether it's the 10% or whether it was the amount that well exceeded the 10% authorized by city policy. As I said, the debate went on for entirely too long. During that period, the employee's salary was not adjusted by the 10%, nor was the employee given the amount that exceeded the 10%. Ultimately, the employee filed a complaint, an internal complaint, and then filed a second internal complaint, essentially arguing that the city was violating the Equal Pay Act, that men who were promoted, they were given salary adjustments, and she was not. Ideally, and perhaps legally, the agency probably should have increased the employee's salary at least by the 10% as required by our policy, notwithstanding there was this outstanding dispute about the additional amount. The employee then filed an external charge with the EEOC. One could say that she may have a colorable claim of failure, a colorable claim under the Equal Pay Act. I spoke with the agency. They consulted with me about this matter. We determined that it is best to try and resolve this matter prior to any trial and prior to any trial. If this employee was successful at trial, she would likely be entitled to back pay. I'm sorry, Mr. President, I forgot to include that. During the time that the dispute was going on, there was a change in administration over at DPW. The former director, Mr. Chow, he separated from the city. There was an acting director. That acting director decided to reorganize the agency. The reorganization did not include this employee. That employee, the employee was separated. The employee subsequently filed the EEOC charge. In speaking with the agency, we concluded that it is best to try and resolve her claim under the Equal Pay Act. Obviously, going to trial, there is a degree of uncertainty. If this employee were to prevail at trial, not only are we looking at likely reinstatement, we're looking at back pay, and we're looking at attorney fees, and attorney fees alone will likely well exceed the settlement request here today. So we are asking that the board consider approving the settlement. And I'm open for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gilkey. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from members of the board to the law department? Ms. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Gilkey. Can you be a little bit more explicit with the board about how exactly the settlement amount was arrived at, how we get this figure of 158 to 98?
Sure. What we did was, again, this dispute dates back to April of 2019. So what I did was I contacted the pension system to ask them to calculate what 10%, ask them to calculate what the employee's salary would be today, starting back in April of 2019, had she received the 10%. They provided me the calculations. I have them here. I don't know if the numbers will mean much, but they provided me the calculation, and the number came up to $158,298. In 2019, MAPS employees received a 2.5 COLA. In 2020, they received, I'm sorry, 2019, I believe it was 2% COLA. 2020 received a fiscal year 2020, received a 2.5% COLA. And fiscal year 2021 received a 2.5% COLA. And that's how we got to the number of 158.98. We didn't add any additional cost to that.
Okay, so basically this is her year's salary, or plus the raise that she was promised but never received by what our policy would have allowed.
Right, plus the COLA.
Okay, so Mr. President, I'm not sure if this next question is better for law or for HR. Was Ms. Phillips a civil service employee, or was she at will?
Ms. Phillips was an at-will employee.
Okay. So before she filed her pay inequity claim, did she make anyone in HR aware of her concerns about not receiving her promised raise?
She did make the folks in DPW HR aware that she was disputing the fact that she was not given the salary that she was promised by the former chief of staff for DPW.
So she was making a salary of X. The former chief of staff for DPW promised her, promoted her to a new job, which she did, which she started for, but then who said she couldn't have the raise that the chief of staff for DPW promised her?
Mr. Comptroller, without getting into name dropping.
Oh, no, I mean agency wise.
Well,
If HR in DPW, if the chief of staff of the agency said, I'm promoting you to this job at this salary, and she didn't get that new salary, what agency, what office is in a position to say, no, we're not going to let you get that salary?
right. It was DPW HR, which says that this salary exceeds the salary authorized by policy.
Okay, so I'm trying to just understand that this was an internal to DPW issue.
That is correct.
Okay, so the chief of staff was basically arguing with HR inside DPW. And what I'm trying to get at is, if this argument went on for a year plus, and she was never given any kind of raise, not even the 10%, where should we change our policy so that if somebody gets promoted, even if they desire, or their supervisor desires to pay them more than whatever our HR rules would allow, where do we change our policy to ensure that they start getting the maximum allowed by policy immediately? And if they want to continue to argue about more, they can continue to argue about more. Because if I'm understanding the way you've laid this out, if we had just paid her the 10% right away and she kept arguing about wanting more, we wouldn't be here today paying her what appears to be something like 10 times what would have just been the original delta allowed by policy.
Right. And Mr. Comptroller, I don't know if it's 10 times, but in answer to your question, let me say that perhaps there should have been better communication between the folks who do the promoting. Actually, there really be an HR person present anytime there's a discussion about promoting an individual to a higher level, as well as any discussion about what that salary would be. And I believe that that's typically what goes on within the agencies.
I get that, and that's good counsel, but where do we have to change the policy inside individual agencies, or is there something that central payroll or central HR can do to ensure that when someone is promoted, they get a salary raise?
Right.
So we don't find ourselves here in this situation.
If I may, Gary, good morning, Comptroller Henry, Mr. President, and Mr. Mayor. The current policy does provide for agencies to submit those promotional documents to Central DHR, because we are responsible for putting them in the system and ensuring that they are proper. There's a process in place whereby agencies who request exceptions to the 10% for, let's say, internal equity, they can make those requests to DHR. That's an exception request. Those requests are either approved or denied based on, we look at not only internal equity within the agency, we look across the city. The policy has in place what everyone is supposed to do. This was a case in which there was no action taken. The actions that are provided in the policy weren't taken. I'm not sure that there is a policy revision that one can make that will prompt action on behalf of the agency employees.
Well, the question I was looking for, or the policy I'm looking for, is how do we make the raise automatic with the promotion? Like you're saying that the actions in the policy weren't taken. So you're saying that the policy does require that when there's a promotion, if a raise is requested, it's given. In this case, the raise that was requested exceeded the scale that's allowed.
Mhm.
What I'm trying to understand is, why didn't they just get the raise that was allowed? Why wasn't that automatic?
Right. And I'll let Quentin speak to whether or not why it's not automatic, but ideally that is what should have occurred, is at least give the 10%. I don't think that there's a policy, and Quentin, you can correct me on this, but I don't believe that there is any policy or system when someone is promoted that they're automatically given the 10%. The way that the policy works is when an individual is promoted, they're either entitled to the 10%, but if that 10% does not bring them to the beginning scale of the new position, they're entitled to that additional amount that would bring them to the beginning scale. Quentin, you can correct me if I misspoke.
No, Gary, that's correct. And there are a number of things that happen from a personnel perspective when a person is promoted. Person has to accept the promotion. I'm not familiar with the facts of this case, but it sounds like the promotion was not accepted because there was continuing ongoing discussion about what the new salary would be. Additionally, the new salary request and promotion needs to be put in our HRIS system. That was not done in this case. And again, while the policy might require it, if the professional whose responsibility it is to input the action doesn't do it, there is no policy by which, no way in which the system could automatically adjust a person's salary.
If she didn't accept the promotion, how can she complain about pay inequity?
Well, she was in the promoted position.
Then she accepted it.
Right. I believe that there was still a dispute about what the salary would be. You had an incoming acting director who I'm sure had a zillion things, and I'm not making excuses for anyone, but a number of things on his plate taking over this agency. Everything should have gone through central HR. There should have been a discussion about what the salary should be before they actually had the person begin performing the functions of the job.
Mr. President, I have several questions. Can I take a break for the mayor to ask his?
No, well, depending on what the questions are and in line with, I think today, and I think we heard from the law department that the money that we're talking about today is the money that this employee would have received if the policy was handled appropriately to allow her to get the 10% plus the COLA in any money that was owed to her just in that position. So I think that that's what the board is charged to vote on today, and that should be the breadth of the discussion today. As it relates to the intricacies of our systems and policy, I think that you are dead on, Mr. Comptroller, in requesting of information from the law department as well as the HR. However, I'm not sure that that is specifically germane to the topic at hand of the 158 $1,298 that this employee would have received just off of the current rules, regulations associated with promotions in HR. With that, Mr. Mayor, I did see your hand raised. Do you have some questions or concerns to add to the discussion?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Comptroller. My question, Director Herbert, was simply about the system. Your understanding is that this was basically a human decision to not follow the policy in the correct way for whatever reason, be that at the direction of the former director or whoever, but this is more about them not following the policy that's very clear to make sure that people get the pay that they're supposed to get.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. President, with all due respect, the reason I was continuing to press with questions is because I think that there was not. It's one thing to say that we didn't follow the process and so we're paying the settlement. What I'm trying to get at, and if you wish, I can do this offline and we can bring the end result back to the board at a future time. But it sounds like at some point either law, HR, or finance should have known to just start paying this person more. And I'm not getting a clear understanding of whether that is part of the process and that was what wasn't followed, or if something else wasn't followed.
Understood.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to understand.
Real quick, so everyone's on the same page. We have subject matter expert from HR on and Director Herbert. And I'm not sure, but is there a requirement that someone is promoted that they automatically get more money, or theoretically could someone be promoted from one band or one position to another and basically retain their existing salary?
Yes, if a person is promoted, meaning that they are going from one classification to a higher classification, they are required to receive a 10% increase.
So the requirement is at a minimum of 10%.
It is 10%. And when we get those in HR, when they are put in the system, that increase is put in. If the agency does not submit it, we don't put it in. If the agency doesn't submit the request and the paperwork, there are times where the agency will request, for example, if I'm promoting Gary Gilkey into the same classification as Quentin Herbert, and Quentin Herbert is making $10 an hour, and I'm promoting Gary Gilkey, and the 10% rule would give Gary Gilkey $5 an hour. That would create inequity. And so the agency may request to bring Gary's salary more closely in line with another employee internally that is in the same classification performing similar work. We will look at that and look at not only internal equity within the agency, but we'll look at that same class externally throughout the city and what the salaries are throughout the city, and making a determination as to whether or not the exception request is granted or not. And then once the exception request, if it's granted, that salary amount that exceeds the 10% is put into the system. If an agency HR professional does not put the promotion in the system that properly, then the employee will not get the 10% increase. What appears to have happened in this case is that we had an agency HR professional or agency HR that was not communicating with central HR about this particular employee who was being moved. And the result was that an employee was moved into a vacant position, and that they did not receive a pay increase that was commensurate with that move.
Understood.
Okay, so, I'm sorry.
Hold on, Comptroller. And for the record, there was a breakdown between the department HR person who did not communicate with the central HR department. And this employee's employment was intact, but their salary just stayed in limbo based off of their previous salary, right?
Correct.
All right.
That's
Now-
essentially what happened.
Now, with the 10% increase, would there still been a pay parity issue for this particular employee?
That I can't speak to. Again, we had not been in communication with the agency, and so I cannot speak to what, if any, pay parity there would be. We know that the agency HR office determined that the proposed increase was excessive and recommended, the 10%, which is what prompted the back and forth between the employee and the agency.
Yeah, Mr. Gilkey, with your research in protecting the city's interests and looking at the liability perspective here, was the employee still out of parity with the 10% increase?
And Mr. President, that's a question that I simply cannot answer because I don't know what the salaries of the other men in the department were. The only thing that I was focused on at the time was making sure our policy complied with and that the person was given the 10%.
Thank you.
Which is what typically happens when one is promoted.
Thank you, Mr. Gilkey. At this point, Mr. Comptroller, do you have any additional questions or concerns?
I still do, thank you. Mr. Herbert, I'm just to be clear, so the agency HR person in DPW simultaneously pushed back against the chief of staff and tried to explain to the chief of staff in DPW that the promotion raise that was being proposed was excessive and was too high. But at the same time, you're saying this same agency HR person in DPW failed to submit any paperwork to central HR to provide for any kind of promotion raise. Is that correct?
What I said, any promotion raise that exceeds the policy.
So did they submit paperwork for a 10% raise?
No.
Okay, so they did not submit paperwork to central HR for any level of raise?
No.
Okay, so next question, is that agency HR person still employed by the city?
I don't know specifically which agency HR person was in discussion with this employee. I do know that there has been some turnover in that particular office, but I don't know which specific agency HR person was in communication with this particular employee.
Okay, well, I would like that information sent to the board. Clearly you don't have it right now, but I'd like to know if the person who, as far as I can take from this situation, that person effectively cost the city over $100,000. And I'd just like to know if they're still here or not. So can I get that information sent?
I will defer.
Yeah, well, I think what we've heard today, and I don't want to speak for the law department or HR. I think what we've heard today is not that it cost the city, that unfortunately it's delayed money
No, Mr. President, I'm sorry to disagree, but that is not what he's saying. What he's saying is that we're paying a settlement that includes a year's full salary.
Mr.
Mr. President, I thought I still had the floor.
Mr. Comptroller, point of order. You did have the floor. I think you made a point. You weren't making a question. You made a statement. And based off of your statement, Mr. Comptroller, based off your statement, I made a statement that you interrupted. Now, we've been doing this for 8 months. We've had really, really good discourse, and we'll continue to have that, but we will keep order. So do you have additional questions? Because I thought you made a final statement. So do you have additional questions?
I have an additional statement. because I
Okay.
believe there's a misunderstanding, sir.
Please make your additional statement, Mr. Comptroller.
Mr. Gilkey said we are paying in the 158,000, we are paying a year's salary of what this employee would have received, including the 10% increase and the subsequent COLAs. The point I am making is that if the agency HR person had just, as required by policy, submitted paperwork for the 10% increase, the employee would have received the 10% increase. And whether they spent an additional year arguing over whether the increase should be bigger or not, there would not have been a case to say that there was a pay inequity. We are effectively paying a penalty of the actual year's salary on top of the extra 10% that the employee should have received and did not, which is why I am saying that if the agency HR person had done their job and followed policy, the city would not be paying out an extra $100,000 plus. That is my point, sir, and that was the one I wanted to make, and I look forward to finding out whether this person is still employed by the city or not. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that it was clear 25 minutes ago that there was breakdown in communications and mishandling of this, starting with the chief of staff onto the department HR person, and then a complete lack of communication back to central HR. So I think that that's a point well taken that we got to 25 minutes ago. I think this argument that there was not pay parity, we do not know that. So Human Resources has responded in answer to that, as well as the law department. So we do not know that with that 10%, that there still would have been a lack of imbalance associated with pay parity. What we also know is that based off of what the law department has provided to us today, that the city could be potentially facing a tremendous amount more pressure associated with this particular case than the salary that pension ultimately helped law department determine and come up with at the $158,000. So I think as it relates to the board and as it relates to our vote today, that those are the factors that should play out. Of course, you know, you have your opinion, Mr. Comptroller, but I think that those are the three main factors in what we're deciding to vote on today. Mr. Mayor, I see your hand at this point. I yield the floor to you.
Yeah, I simply raise my hand to say I think that Director Herbert will be able to follow up with the comptroller around the information that he needs. But Mr. President, I make a motion to approve.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion on the floor. It's been properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. This item is approved. As there's no new business before the desk of this board, we will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will reconvene on Wednesday, August the 4th at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, we love you.
Go.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. The Board of Estimates is now in session for the receiving and opening of bids. As part of the overall effort to limit transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the Board of Estimates is conducting bid openings virtually. Members of the public can call in to listen to bid openings live by calling 443-984-1696 and entering access code 0842939. Board of Estimates meetings are broadcast live on Charm TV, channel 25 on Comcast Cable in Baltimore City. Meetings are also streamed on the internet at www.charmtvbaltimore.com. Members of the public can go to that website and click on the live stream link at the top of the homepage. The Board of Estimates will continue to conduct bid openings virtually as the city continues to assess options for reopening City Hall and conducting public meetings in person. There are no addenda to note for this meeting. So we will proceed right away with proposal B50005926, Police and Fire Exam Consultant. Envelope B, price proposals. First one is from Morris and McDaniel Incorporated with a total price of $517,900 and no cents. The second bid is from Industrial Organizational Solutions with a total price of $618,885 and no cents. And the final is from National Testing Network with a grand total of $388,340 and no cents.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. I move that we refer this to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. The second is proposal B50006149, direct delivery of snack food items to Shake and Bake Fun Center. We have, one bidder. And that is Food Pro Corporation. In the amount of $4,925.85. That is the only bidder for this contract.
I move that we refer this to the Bureau of Procurement for tabulation and report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. There being no other business before the board, the Board of Estimates will stand in recess until next Wednesday, August 4th at 9 a.m. Thank you very much, and everybody stay safe.